Welcome to Oak City Church, a family of learners, lovers, and givers sent. For more information, visit us online at oakcitychurch.com. Let us know if we can help you in any way. Thank you for listening.
Today's scripture reading comes from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verses 30 through 37. And it says, "They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise.' But they did not understand the saying, and were afraid to ask him. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, 'What were you discussing on the way?' But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12. And he said to them, 'If anyone would be first, he must be last of all and servant of all.' And he took a child and put him in the midst of them. And taking him in his arms, he said to them, 'Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me.'" This is the word of the Lord.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Good morning. Morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Graham Harris. I'm the youth pastor and the worship leader here, and I'm honored to bring the word to you this morning. Jeff, every couple of months, Jeff unleashes me on you guys. So, it's a real honor. I'm really excited to be here this morning. Thanks for joining us. We're going to continue to look in the book of Mark, but before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the internet. How many of you guys use the internet? Okay, like some of you. Expected more hands. If you've been on the internet, if you're like me, you've been on the internet, you may have noticed that the internet has a tendency to kind of feel a little bit like a minefield at times. Right? Every topic, every post feels like it's just like one or two comments away from really turning into this like heated battlefield. Everybody's got their own opinion, and everybody wants you to know their opinion, and their opinion is right. Right? No issue is gray. Every issue is black and white. And there's one particular issue, one particularly controversial event that took place that was so divisive that it nearly broke the internet. And some of you guys are already like trying to find Jeff, like the youth pastor's a minute into the sermon, he's already about to go off the deep end. This one particular controversial event, right, it seeped out into our culture. You couldn't escape it. People were talking about it at school and at work and at the dinner table. It was dividing families. Some of you guys may recognize this image when I put this on the screen, right? How many of you guys remember this viral image from, it was about 10 years ago. If you don't remember it, all right, this was an innocent image that someone posted to Facebook in spring of 2015, and it shook the world to its core because nobody could agree what color that dress was. Now, some of you guys are remembering it now, right? All right, so I know that like talking about politics is racy, but this is going to be maybe even a little more divisive. How many of us were on team blue and black? Okay. How many were on team white and gold? Okay, not as many. So again, I know it's like you're not supposed to share my political opinions up here, and this may be even more extreme, but I was a white and gold. I still am a white and gold truther. All right. So, I look at that image and I can't see anything but white and gold, right? But the reality is that no matter which side of this particularly controversial issue you found yourself on, right, the way that you see that image is the way that you see that image, right? If you see it as blue and black, you're not lying, right? Like that's seriously how you perceive that image. Now, I think you're wrong, and if you see it in white and gold, that is how you see that picture. That's how you perceive that. And it's kind of a silly example, but the reality is that our expectations, our assumptions, our experiences, the way that we perceive things has a big role in the way that we see the world around us, right? Our perceptions of things help shape the way that we see ourselves, help shape the way that we see other people, help shape the way that we see God. And throughout the book of Mark, Jesus is constantly challenging the perception of the people around him, right? He's challenging the people and saying, I know that you see this as white and gold, but the reality is that the dress was actually blue and black. So I'm sorry to all of us white and gold people. The true dress actually was blue and black. And Jesus is saying, I know that you see the world this way, but I'm going to flip your perception upside down, and this is the way that you should see the world, right? So he's challenging social boundaries. He's dining with tax collectors and sinners. We've seen him challenge the Pharisees and their legalism and their traditions. We've seen him heal unclean people. We've seen him challenge people's faith and their fear, right? Challenging their perspective. And in this passage, it's the disciples that he's challenging. So we start with verse 30, Mark 9:30 says, "They went on from there and passed through Galilee. And he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise.' But they did not understand the saying and were afraid to ask him." So right here, Jesus is challenging their perspective of who he is, of who Jesus is. And so often when we read the Gospels and we read these stories about the disciples, we have a tendency to be a little harsh on them sometimes, I think. We keep reading, we read about Peter, right, who boldly proclaims that Jesus is the Messiah, and then later on is the same guy who denies Jesus 3 times. And you read stuff like that, and it leaves you scratching your head thinking, these are the guys that are actually walking with the physical person of Jesus. Like, how do they not get it? It's easy for us to kind of get into that, we're a little hard on the disciples. And so when we read this section of the passage, Jesus is foretelling his death for the second time. It can be hard for us to relate because they don't understand what Jesus is saying. And when we read this, we're like, obviously, yeah, Jesus is coming to die. It's the Bible. The central, event of the Bible is Jesus dying on the cross. How do they not understand this? It's easy for us to see that because we're 2,000 years on the other side of the story, looking back at it. But for them, they knew, right, a couple passages before, they knew that Jesus was the Messiah. And when they knew that he was the Messiah, they had a very strict understanding of what they thought the Messiah was going to be. They knew that the Messiah was going to be a descendant of King David. They knew that he was going to be a just and wise teacher. They knew that he was going to defeat the enemies, and for them that meant the Romans. And they thought that the Messiah was coming to establish a new kingdom, bringing all the exiled Jews back to Jerusalem and establishing this new kingdom in Israel. And that was the Jewish perception of what the Messiah was going to do. So in the last chapter, when Peter is proclaiming that Jesus is the Messiah, what he's saying is, Jesus is the guy that's going to do all these things. And Jesus responds by saying, a little different than maybe you expected. I'm actually coming and I'm going to be killed. And so it can easy, when you see it that way, it can be easy to understand, oh yeah, they didn't get it. Their expectations did not meet the reality. We have, I think as humans, we often have this tendency to let our expectations get in the way of the things that are happening right in front of us, the good things that are happening right in front of us. Ashley and I have this kind of song and dance that happens to us about once every 6 months, where we'll be sitting on the couch watching TV, and a commercial will come on TV for the restaurant Olive Garden. You guys ever go to Olive Garden? So we see this commercial, and if you guys have ever seen one of these commercials, especially when you're hungry, you see this commercial, and it's the most divine-looking meal you could possibly imagine. Whoever they have doing their commercials really does a stand-up job, because you watch those Olive Garden commercials, and you're like, that looks like that would be the most delicious meal I've ever eaten in my entire life. And so about once every 6 months, we'll see the commercial, and we'll think, oh, we haven't been to Olive Garden in a while. Maybe we should go to Olive Garden. And so, we'll say, all right, it's Monday night now. Friday night, we're going to go to Olive Garden. And I at least build this up in my mind this is going to be just as good as the commercial. It's going to be the greatest meal that I've ever eaten. I get so excited, and Friday comes, and I'm giddy, and I make my way to the Capitol Boulevard Olive Garden. And I go in, and we eat, and it's good. It's pretty good, right? The food's good. It's edible, right? We have a good time. But every single time without fail, we leave there, and I'm like, yeah, but it wasn't as good as the commercial. It didn't taste as good as it looked on TV. Right? I have this unbelievably high expectation, and despite the fact that the food we ate was probably pretty good, it doesn't meet my expectation, and therefore I walk away a little disappointed. One of the reasons when I was hired here, there were a couple of reasons that Jeff says that they hired me. One of them is that I have a CDL and I drove a semi-truck, and Jeff thought that was a really great thing. So I'm glad that he appreciates that. The other was that I'm a fan of the Green Bay Packers, and Jeff and I, woohoo! Jeff and I and several others of us find community in that. And if you're not a football fan, this might not make any sense to you, but if you are a football fan, you know that the Green Bay Packers had a pretty good season last year. We're hoping to build on that. And in the offseason, they made a move and traded for maybe the best defensive player in the NFL, Micah Parsons. Sorry to us, the Cowboys fans in the room. Micah Parsons came to the Packers, and so when I see this news as a Packers fan, I'm like, we were pretty good last year. We had a pretty good offense. Now we're getting the best defensive player in the league. We're going to win the Super Bowl. Like, it's decided. It's like, we don't even need to play. Just give them the trophy, give them the rings. Like, it's over, right? And I tell you, that, like, week and a half, 2 weeks of the offseason after they signed Micah Parsons was like the closest I've come to when they won the Super Bowl in 2010. Like, it was awesome. And so, of course, I'm building up these expectations as the season gets started. We're going undefeated. We're going to beat everybody by 100. Nobody's going to score against us. Like, it's just going to be great. It's going to be awesome. And we start off pretty good. We start off 2-0. And then we get to week 3, and we're playing the Cleveland Browns. And again, if you don't know football, that might not mean anything to you. But the Cleveland Browns are, without a doubt, the worst team in the NFL over the last 25 years. Sorry if we've got any Cleveland Browns fans in the audience. But they have just had a miserable time. They're always one of the worst teams. And so I'm going into this thinking, all right, Packers are the greatest team of all time. We're going to destroy them. And we go into this game against the Browns, and everything goes wrong for the Packers. And somehow, against all odds, the worst team in the NFL, the Browns, managed to beat the greatest team ever assembled, the Packers. And the Packers have recovered since then, and they've won, and we're like 6-4-1 now or something like that. Like we got a pretty decent shot at making the playoffs. But I can't help but when I look at the Packers, I can't help but feel a little disappointed, because in my mind I had built them up as this team that was going to go undefeated and going to win every game and have an easy run to the Super Bowl. And we've lost a couple of games, and it hasn't always been great. They're still a good team, but my expectations were something totally different, and it has kind of ruined my experience a little bit watching the Packers this season. The disciples had this expectation of what Jesus was going to be, and when he tells them, hey, I'm actually going to die, it kind of destroys the image that they had built up in their mind, right? They're imagining like a WWE scene where The Rock comes in and drops the people's elbow on the Romans. Like that's what's in their mind, and they're getting this guy who's like, yeah, they're going to kill me. So it's easy to see then on that side of the story how this is a little confusing for the disciples. Right? It's a lot easier to see it when you're on the other side of it, and the same is true for the disciples, right? I love Peter in Acts chapter 2 at Pentecost. He says, men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. Verse 23, he's basically saying right here in verse 23, the same thing that Jesus is telling them here in Mark. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. Right? He's laying out the same thing that Jesus was laying out, but now he gets it because he's on the other side of it. Verse 24, God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. See, on the front side of the story, the disciples don't get it, but then once they see God's plan come to be, they're like, oh, now I get it. Like, he's not here to kill the Romans. He's here to defeat a much bigger enemy, sin and death and the grave. And it calls to mind for me a little bit the story of David and Goliath. You guys remember that story? And the disciples here know that they have this giant that needs to be defeated, though the giant that really needs to be defeated is a lot bigger than the one that they picture. They have this giant in their mind, and they know they need somebody, they need a hero to come and defeat this giant. And who shows up but little shepherd boy David? And it would be normal for them to be a little disappointed and a little confused, how is this kid with his sling and his stones going to defeat the big bad giant? But the reality is that God has a plan for his glory to be revealed in a way that is so much greater than anything they could have possibly expected. So Jesus, first of all, is challenging their perspective on him. The second thing is that Jesus is challenging their perspective of themselves. We go to verse 33. And they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they kept silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last and a servant of all." I don't know about you, but when I read this, it reads to me like a scene from a sitcom almost. Right? Jesus is in the passage before is saying, "Hey, I'm going to have to humble myself. I'm going to have to die." It cuts to commercial break, and then we come back. We get the little Seinfeld do bass, and Jesus walks into the house. They think it was probably Peter's house in Capernaum. Jesus walks in and goes, "Hey, so what are you guys talking about?" And they're like, "Which one of us is the greatest?" And in my mind, when I read this, there's a laugh track that follows that, because it's so hilarious that Jesus is talking about dying and sacrificing himself, and they're arguing about which one of them is going to get the corner office in heaven. The more I think about this, though, the more I realize that this is a conversation that we're having amongst ourselves or internally all the time. Right? We even have a new slang word for it. If you ever come and hang out with the youth, which as a youth pastor, this is my chance to give a shameless plug and say you should come and hang out with the youth sometime. If you ever come and hang out with the youth, especially the guys, you know that there's a 50-50 chance that any conversation is going to delve into a question of who's the GOAT. Right? You guys have heard that term, the GOAT? It's talked about in sports a lot. We talk about who's the GOAT, right? Is it Tom Brady, or is Patrick Mahomes going to be the new GOAT? Right? That's a controversial one in the youth group for sure. Is it Jordan, or is it LeBron? Sometimes, who thinks it's Jordan? Jordan. Who thinks it's LeBron? Not a lot of LeBron fans in here. Okay, I grew up with Jordan, so I like Jordan too. Sometimes it's pretty clear cut, right? When you think about golf, the GOAT is Tiger Woods, right? When you think about hockey, it's Wayne Gretzky. My personal favorite GOAT athlete, you may be familiar with him. His name is Joey Chestnut. Anybody know who Joey Chestnut is? Some of you are saying that guy's not an athlete, but I tell you, that man has a finely tuned body. He is a machine. If you don't know Joey Chestnut, next 4th of July, turn your TV to ESPN, and you can watch him eat 50 or 60 hot dogs in the span of 10 minutes. It's really impressive. He holds the record for the most hot dogs eaten in 10 minutes with 76. He also, not only is he number 1 on the leaderboard, but he's also spots 2 through 13. So he's won something like 15 times in a row, except for last year. And you go, what happened last year? Last year, he did a commercial with Impossible, the meat substitute, and they banned him from the Nathan's Hot Dog Contest. But then they realized it wasn't really fair, it didn't really matter if he wasn't there. So they brought him back, and he won again. So Joey Chestnut, he's undisputed the GOAT when it comes to eating hot dogs, right? What about outside of sports, right? It's easy to compare who's the greatest when it comes to sports, but what about in the real world? Who's the greatest? Is it the person with the most money? Is it the person with the highest IQ? Is it the person with the most influence, the highest number of followers? Is it the person maybe who's the most charitable, who gives the most back? Who's the greatest person of all time? Who's the GOAT? Jeff uses this illustration about how from a young age we line ourselves up from the coolest to the least cool. And it starts when you're in elementary school, and it's obvious, and it continues, and the things that you measure yourselves by, the ways that you measure who's the greatest, who's the coolest, that might change. But the reality is that there's always this line of comparison, who's the coolest, who's the best. Right? So when you're in first grade, at least for the guys, I can't speak for the girls, but I know for the guys, when you're in first grade, the person that's the coolest is the person who can run the fastest, right? Does anyone else remember who the fastest person in their first grade class was? Is this something that we remember? So I asked the youth this a couple weeks ago, and they were all like, oh yeah, it was so-and-so. Like, I remember. One of the youth was like, it was me. I was like, whatever, come on. But I remember, right, it's been a long time since I was in the first grade, but I remember the fastest kid in our first grade class was Logan Whitehead. And I was like third, so I was pretty high up there, but I wasn't the fastest. And like, that was such a big deal, and that determined like who, when I said it to the youth, one of them even said like, oh, that's how you figured out who was the coolest. Like, yeah, that's how you knew, that's how you lined them up. And it changes as you get older, right? I don't really know which one of us is the fastest. It's not me for sure. But as we get older, it changes to like, how much money are we making? How high up the social ladder have we climbed? How many people do I have working under me? Or for some of us, the way that we compare ourselves, maybe how we're doing as a parent. Right? My kid's got straight A's this semester. My kid's on the honor roll. I'm doing a pretty good job. Right? For some of us, it's how we parent. For some of us, we let spirituality be the vehicle for comparison. Right? I do my Bible study every morning, and I even do it sometimes at night. Right? I'm a great follower of God. Right? I have invited so many people. I call people and share the gospel with them. I tell everybody that I meet about Jesus. Right? I'm doing a great thing. I'm a great disciple. I'm a great follower of God. Right? That's what the disciples are kind of saying. Which one of them is the greatest? For some of us, that comparison thing, we kind of flip it on its head, and it's kind of the opposite, right? Instead of, oh, my kid's got straight A's, I look at Instagram and I see all these families who've got it all together, and I look at my family and it's falling apart, right? Or when it comes to spiritual matters, it's, man, I go to church, I see all these people who are on fire for Jesus, and I really want to be that, but I keep falling into the same traps, into the same sins, into the same patterns. I can't get out. I want to live my life for Jesus, but I keep messing up. We have a tendency to turn anything we can into a scoreboard, but especially our spirituality. And Jesus is taking that idea and he's flipping it on its head. Again, he's flipping the perspective. And he's saying, if anyone would be first, he must be last and a servant of all. One of the things I love about this passage is that Jesus doesn't rebuke them for having ambition. He doesn't rebuke their drive or their motivation. He doesn't say, you shouldn't try to be first. He says, okay, yeah, it's good to have things that drive you. It's good to have things to push for. But if you're gonna have drive, if you're gonna have ambition, this is what you should be ambitious about. He's not calling us to be less ambitious. He's calling us to redirect that ambition. He's saying, if you want to be great in my kingdom, this is how you do it. You must be first. If anyone would be first, he must be last and the servant of all. The word servant in that passage is the Greek word diakonos, which is where we get the word deacon. So a modern-day example for us about what this word would mean would be like someone who waits tables. It's not a slave. It's not somebody that's forced to serve. It's somebody who willingly takes up a position of servanthood, voluntarily takes on that role to serve others. So what Jesus is saying here is that greatness in his kingdom is not about climbing up the ladder. It's about kneeling for others. He's saying that greatness isn't measured by how many people serve you, but it's measured by how many people you serve. Jesus is challenging the disciples. He's challenging us, the way that we see ourselves, the way that we define greatness. He's also challenging their perspective when it comes to others. Verse 36 says, he took a child and put him in the midst of them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. Now to us, this might not seem like a super radical concept. Right? In our society, children are valued very highly. We believe that children are the future. Right? If you're a parent, odds are the most important people in your life are probably your kids. Like, we value children very highly. But in that culture, it's a little bit different. In that culture, children had no voice, no influence, no status, no rights. Right? Like, children were meant to be seen and not heard. Like, they were not valued the same way that we value kids in our society. They were, in other words, the absolute bottom of the social ladder. So when we read this, it's easy for us with our 2025 understanding of things to read this and say, oh, Jesus is just saying, like, be nice to the kids, right? Maybe Jesus is saying, like, go serve in the nursery, right? Maybe. But really what he's saying is that the greatness in his kingdom is not defined the way that we treat the people above us, but it's defined by how we treat the people at the lowest end of the ladder. It's not how we treat our bosses and our CEOs. Right, it's easy to be nice to them because you get something in return. No, it's how we treat the people who have no ability to offer us anything in return. And in doing so, Jesus is revealing his heart because he's identifying himself with the humble and the needy and the marginalized. So while the disciples are arguing about which one of them is the goat, who's the greatest among them, Jesus is pointing to someone who is in their society viewed as the lowest. While they're calculating their status, Jesus is elevating those who are overlooked. And he's redefining the way that we see other people by inviting us to extend compassion and attention and presence, even when we have nothing to gain from the situation. So we get to the end of this passage, and it would be really easy for me to wrap this up and tie this up with a nice bow as this nice moral lesson, right? Don't worry about being great. Try to be nice to other people, right? Be nice to kids. Be humble. Treat people with respect. And that's all good. Like that's a good lesson. But that's not what this is. Because there's another layer to this. And without this bottom layer, the most important piece of the puzzle, you can't get what Jesus is really saying. Because what he's saying to welcome the child, but before he ever asks us to welcome the child, he first welcomes us. Before he ever calls us to be humble, he is humbling himself before us on the cross, dying for us. Before he ever said, serve one another, he was willing to serve us to the point of death on a cross. See, the disciples misunderstood Jesus. They argued about which one of them was the greatest. And they're missing the point over and over and over and leaving us scratching our heads thinking, what are these guys doing? Why don't they get it? They come up short time and time again, and yet Jesus doesn't push them away. He doesn't give up on them. He doesn't go find new disciples in next year's draft, right? He welcomes them. He teaches them. He walks with them. And ultimately, he goes to the cross for them. And so that's grace. And that's what underlines this entire passage. And that's what empowers us with everything that we read in this passage has to be empowered by grace. Grace empowers us to pursue humility because Jesus first humbled himself for us. Jesus empowers us to welcome others because first he welcomed us when we were at our lowest, when we had nothing that we could possibly offer him. When I read this passage, sometimes, anytime I read the Bible, I try to think of who am I in this story? And so obviously we're striving to be like Jesus, right? He's the most perfect example of humility. Oftentimes I find myself like the disciples, right? Arguing about status or greatness, concerned with comparing myself to other people. But the reality is that when I read this story, I am the child. I am the person who has sinned and lowly and small and needy at the bottom of the ladder with nothing to offer, and yet Jesus loves us and accepts us and welcomes us. And he died for us so that he could pay the penalty for the sins that we committed. See, in the book of Mark, constantly Jesus is turning the perspective of the people around him upside down. He's constantly turning the disciples' understanding of the kingdom upside down, and it only starts to make sense when you realize that Jesus is a king who lives upside down. You guys get what I mean by that? Jesus is a king, and yet he was willing to leave his throne and come down and serve the people that offered him nothing in return. Jesus redefines what greatness means through his death on a cross. and he welcomes the least of us. He welcomes us while we were still sinners. He died for us. Let's pray. God, I thank you for this day. I thank you that we can gather here together. God, I thank you for your word. And God, I'm thankful that when I was at my worst, while I was a sinner, God, that you saw me and you had enough love for me that you sent your son to die on the cross in my place. God, I'm thankful that no amount of good deeds or no amount of good works could ever earn your love, but you love us no matter what. God, we love you. We praise you. It's in your son's name we pray.